Target selection complete. Time on target sequence complete.
We are on launch mode.
The United States and the Soviet Union came close to a nuclear war in the early 1960s under President Kennedy and Prime Minister Khrushchev over the Soviets putting missiles in Cuba. When the Cuban Missile Crisis took place, I was in high school, and we were following it in the news. The Strategic Air Command dispersed bombers, took them from their Air Force bases and put them in airports in cities to raise the stakes, because then if the Russians wanted to attack and destroy our bomber fleet, they had to attack and destroy our cities. And when I got to school, there was an air raid drill, and it was clear that none of the teachers knew it was a drill. They hadn't been told. You could see the look of fear in their faces. And I thought, if there's going to be a nuclear war, I'm not sure I want to die in my high school. And I calculated in my head how long it would take to get home and how long it would take for the Russian missiles to hit. We knew that by the time the air raid siren went off, we probably only had 20 minutes before a missile would strike. And I calculated that I couldn't make it home in 20 minutes. I wanted to be with my family, but chances are I'd die alone in the subway. So I stayed at the school. And then we realized it was only a drill.
The international mood was certainly different than it is now. There were two superpowers, the US and the USSR. There were certainly war games being played by both powers. From the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis up to the early 80s, not all that much had changed in terms of the relationship of the two. We had massive buildup of nuclear warheads. They had a massive buildup of nuclear warheads.
We have a launch detection. We have a Soviet launch detection.
But in the early 80s, you had the atmosphere of the Cold War reawakening when it had basically lain dormant through the 1970s. President Nixon and followed by President Ford with Kissinger had created this policy of détente. That is to say, standing neutral. You know, the hostilities are acknowledged, but they're not life-threatening. But in the case of Ronald Reagan, you had a true believer as president, a guy who believed that communism was evil. And when the elderly Bolsheviks, who were then running the Soviet Union, saw him coming along, they realized that this guy means business.
When Reagan came into office, we didn't understand in the United States the fear that that put into the Soviet military and the Soviet leadership. Moscow thought Ronald Reagan was a real cowboy who wanted to go to war. And so Moscow sent secret agents to US Air Force bases throughout Europe. And they would sit in cars near the end of the runway beyond the fence. And their job was to radio Moscow if the American nuclear bombers took off to fly toward the Soviet Union. That's how much they thought it was likely that Reagan would launch a preemptive nuclear war in Europe.
He started calling the Soviet Union the evil empire, and people were scared. And we had already been through a Cuban Missile Crisis 20 years earlier, and I think that did have a lot to do with it.
There was something called the doomsday clock, and it was the opinion of the community of nuclear scientists how close we were to doomsday. And at the time, 1982, 83, we were like right at around 4 minutes to doomsday. That's how tense the situation was perceived to have been at the time. It was absolutely on everybody's mind.
Reagan wasn't even talking to Russia at the time. It didn't seem that far-fetched that somebody could make a mistake and the whole world would suddenly blow up. I didn't know about NORAD and that there was a huge facility underneath a mountain to keep running things should this happen. I mean, it was real.
NORAD, which stands for North American Aerospace Defense Command, they do actually have one of their headquarters in Colorado, and its job is to basically watch the skies. And at the time, if the Russians were going to come after us, they were going to come after us with missiles, planes, etc. through the sky. NORAD was a big operation back then.
Confidence is high. I repeat, confidence is high.
One of the things that people need to understand that NORAD is still doing basically its same missions of assessing and protecting North America, both the United States and Canada, against all airspace and missile threats. When you first come here to Cheyenne Mountain, this is the first thing that you're greeted by is what we call the North Portal. It's the main entrance that we have to Cheyenne Mountain. The space inside, we have approximately 8 acres of space that have been whittled out of the mountain back in 1961 when it was first began by the Utah Mining and Construction Company. We have about 5.5 acres of actual office space in there that we actually use are occupied by our buildings inside. The facility is protected by 2,000 feet of granite, approximately 285 billion metric cubic tons of it. And there's no greater protection and fortress that you'll have anywhere else in the world. NORAD came out of being from the old Continental U.S. Command back in the early 50s. General Partridge, who was the first 4-star in charge of NORAD, decided that in order to be able to conduct a nuclear war, he needed to be able to have something that was very well protected for his command and control node, which is how Cheyenne Mountain came into being. This bunker was built to be able to survive a near miss of a multi-megaton weapon in this area. Now, Cheyenne Mountain has never been designed to survive a direct nuclear blast, and that's always been common knowledge. When you first come to the end of the tunnel junction here in Cheyenne Mountain, first in your rebar, there are 2 blast doors. They're both 25 tons each, and if one fails, you always have one in place. And during the Cold War, you would also have this as an entrapment area, so that way you were never caught unawares by a bolt out of the blue or a surprise nuclear attack by the former Soviet Union. So you would have people enter with one door open, the door would then close behind them, and the second would open up, thereby always guaranteeing that the facility was protected at all times. What you see behind me here are some of the 1,319 springs that support our buildings here at Cheyenne Mountain Complex. They weigh approximately 1,000 pounds and they're 47 inches in height. Once the weight of the building is put on them, though, they actually compress down to 37 inches in height. And these act to negate the force of a blast here within the vicinity during a nuclear war. These are basically just larger versions of your shock absorbers that you have on your car. It would allow the buildings to snap back into place and still be survivable and keep all the command and control structures operational.
Let's go into a launch mode, close up the mountain.
I saw WarGames back in 1983. I noticed that in the film that their command center is very spacious.
The differences, I think, between the command center and the film and what you see back here behind me is this is a little bit smaller. When you look at the film and you see that vast array of people that look sort of like a NASA setup, you're not going to see that in the main command center.
Once the film came out, we invited the military to see it, and they said, "We love this movie. What a wonderful science fiction movie. None of this exists." And we said, really? Some of the junior officers at NORAD who saw it said to us, "My God, your stuff is so much better than ours. We only have black and white images. You have color." And I thought to myself, wait a minute. These guys control the entire missile defense system of the United States, and we have color and they have black and white, and we're just making a movie.
It was an amazing film because I think it really foreshadowed many of the tools that we use today. The use of computers to talk amongst each other, the use of computers for command centers, to use to make decisions.
Shall we play a game? Which side do you want?
But probably that's where it goes astray from reality, is that the computers don't make the decisions.
The reality is, of course, that the way we do business ensures that there's always people in the loop. The decisions are made by real people with lots of experience who have a good understanding of what's happening around them.
This new facility will rely upon the vast improvements in network technology that we've seen really even in the last 5 or 6 years. There are some concerns that have been raised by some that by moving out of the structure of Cheyenne Mountain that you put our forces, our command and control, the nation at some additional risk. The reality is that the advantages of integrated network technology, of providing decision quality information, outweigh the threat that is potentially there. One of the reasons we're keeping the mountain, however, is that you can't discount that some force in the future may be able to hold this building at risk from a long-range missile or some other threat.
Cheyenne Mountain's not going away after the transformation, which is supposed to be happening in 2007. And basically, it will still be a command and control node, and we will still use it for training purposes and for real-world purposes if necessary. So Cheyenne Mountain is going to be around for many years to come.